Making some more progress. We'll go over the steering column and brake and clutch pedal assembly. What I've been working on. So this is that Borgeson joint that I mentioned in the previous video, which I'll try to remember to add that parts list to this video as well since it applies to it. So that's that specific one that goes to the Chrysler steering box to a 3/4 inch shaft, and then this one goes from 3/4 to 1 inch to the column. This one I got off eBay. It's stainless steel, probably made in China. That's the Borgeson one. This one was about twice as much as that one, but I got this one and made sure to take all these little keepers out and put Loctite on them and put them back, because you don't want that falling out at any time, letting those U-joint caps come out. These are stamped, so they ain't coming out of there. And then I also Loctited all these Allen head bolts to that shaft, because you don't want any of this stuff coming apart as time goes on. And then we've got a 30-inch tilt column that I bought off Amazon. I might have to end up having to go with the Flaming River or the I Did It one later on. The quality of this one's not very good, but this is such an early part of this project. I didn't want to go spend $1,000 on a steering column right out of the gate. So these are less than 200, I think. So I'll show you how I mounted the steering column. So the previous video I mentioned that I used a 2.5-inch drop of this piece here. Ended up not being enough, so I bought a 3.5-inch, and that puts the steering wheel in a comfortable spot for me. And I also ran the steering column up as high as I could through that floor plate. Some guys run them down, anywhere in this vicinity here, but the farther down that is, the steeper the steering column gets. So I wanted to get it up as high as possible to lower the angle here. So this all feels pretty good to me. The lower clamp is actually an exhaust flapper clamp. I was looking online what the steering column, these base clamps are, and they're not real cheap. And I was walking through the Tractor Supply store, and I bought these for our equipment. And I was like, well, I don't see why a 2-inch one of those couldn't be retrofitted. It's just a steel collar. So I cut the flap part off, and then I actually used tabs from the part that holds the flapper on, and I'll throw an image up here. And just cut those parts off, and then just re-welded them on here to bolt through the floor. I got lucky setting the angle of those little pieces. A guy probably needs to mock that up and make sure your steering column to floors, it's not going to be perfectly perpendicular. The ones you buy, spend some more money on, they've got a bolt stud welded here. That way that makes it more adjustable. So I guess those would technically be easier to install, but I'm cheap, and this is like an $8 exhaust flap. So that's the route I went. The floor plate here is thicker than the body. I think it's like 16 gauge. The body's 18 or 19, I think. I might be wrong, but this is decently thick. I wanted the strength of that for this mount here, and then I bolted these are normally screwed in. I've still got a couple screws, but I bolted these other ones in just to reinforce that plate in case to keep it from working loose, which I don't know if that would happen, but just in case. This steering column is a tilt wheel, 30-inch is what I ended up with, and so there's not much. We'll zip back around here. There's not much sticking out through the floor here. Just about an inch or inch and a half, because I wanted to get I wanted to stop this as soon as possible to start this joint to angle down there, because the farther this drops down, the wonkier this angle would get. So I wanted to be high here, so it all just kind of gradually goes down, so all these joints don't get bound up when we're turning. Steering wheel, it's just the old classic style, because like I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of going for a 60s look, interior exterior. So that was a real common style of steering wheel back in the day, back in the 60s. Well, have been forever, but I think that's about when it started. So that, I think, covers the steering wheel, steering column. So now we can go over what I did with the brake assembly. So this is the assembly out of the Mustang. unbolted it all out. That way the clutch and the brake and all that stuff would work correctly, or the clutch would work correctly with the engine transmission setup that we were going with out of the Mustang. What I had to do, I'll try to get in here, is I had to trim that bracket off right there. You can kind of see, so I measured the depth from the firewall to the dash and then cut that off, and then I had to build a, let me pause this for a second, this bracket adapter, so you can see the welds there along the factory bracket. And then I added this other piece, it's 2.5 inches thick or something like that, to go on top of the dash. And then I added some reinforcement pieces there, since it didn't want just a flat weld, because that's it's all tied in, but there's still going to be a lot of force over the years of using the brake and the clutch, so I wanted to kind of beef that up. And then I did have to put a few spacers between the bottom of the dash, because that's kind of like a piece of channel iron that runs across the dash. So in order for that flat piece to sit on there and get tight, I had to put some spacers, a couple just flat bars in there to raise that up. But the steering column mounts to this bracket, and then there's another bolt there that mounts it just to the dash. And then on the firewall, you can kind of see that angle iron piece there back around here. So this piece right here is another piece of 16 gauge sheet metal. I bent some angles on it, so it reinforces it, makes it more rigid. I didn't want this mounted just to the firewall, because that's not what that was designed for. The master cylinders, of course, on these originally are on the frame underneath the truck. So this firewall should be beefed up, even though it's all tied into the dash and all that. That's just a lot of force, especially in an emergency stop where you're putting everything you got into that brake pedal. You don't want your master cylinder pushing out through the firewall. So I went ahead and ran it clear up past the ridges. That way that plate has lots of strength to it, pushing and pulling. I did make a mistake when I originally installed this assembly, as I put the hole through right here for the master cylinder, and that screwed the brake pedal alignment up too much. I couldn't, there would be no way to bend that pedal over and be safe, because the farther that pedal gets bent, the weaker this gets, and it could be prone to bend or fail in an emergency stop or hard stop, of course. So I had to fill all that back in, and then also had to fill the firewall in here where for the 79 steering column went through there. So that's all been patched up. So you can kind of see I had to bend the brake pedal over just a little bit. I only had to move it over about an inch or something, so that shouldn't be enough to affect the engineering of it. I'll cut those pads off like I just mentioned, and put either the original style round ones that these had, or the later style square ones. I would square them up when I re-welded them back on there. But that's just fine for now. It works, functions fine. Looks a little weird, but it feels okay. We'll circle back around to that at some other point. I'll show the firewall here a little bit closer. Originally, like I said, I put the master cylinder clear over here, thinking I was going to need more room for the engine. And then after I kind of mocked the engine up in here, I've got tons of room, especially with this smaller booster. But I even got room if I need to enlarge that booster later on for whatever reason. I've still got, the valve covers aren't on here, but they're going to come up a little bit. I've got tons of room there. So I've moved that back over, patched that all up. And again, you can see where I patched the old steering column hole up. So that came out all right. It doesn't have to look great anyway. It's just going to be a driver. Biggest thing is safety and wanting to reinforce this whole piece behind there with that plate, so it's good and strong, tied into the dash. So there's lots of reinforcement there. So I think that pretty much covers the steering and my brake setup to this point. The engine's just sitting in there on blocks. I've not gotten very far on that yet, so that'll be probably our next video, is going over the transmission, what I had to do there to move the tail shaft and stuff. I bought an S10 tail shaft, so I'll go over that as well. But that's it for now.